I'm going to admit the guests as well now.
The latest of that. We can do. Oh. I don't want to put my camera on.
Who's got that?
I've just muted everyone, including you, John, so we need to unmute yourself. Just got a couple more people requesting to join, so we'll just give it sort of 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Haslers Spring Budget Update for 2023. Before I pass you over to John, who will be taking the giving the summary this morning, or this afternoon, sorry. So if we just have a few housekeeping rules, if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself muted throughout, that would be great, because that would just help with stopping the interference. We will be taking questions at the end, but if you'd like to pop them in the messages throughout, then please feel free to. Or at the end, if you want to unmute yourself to ask a question, then that would be great. So we are recording this, so we will send you around the a recording after it. So if you wanted to catch up or pass it on to anyone, then please feel free. So I'll pass you over to John O'Shea, Haslers chairman, and he will take the summary.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. And welcome to our budget summary for 2023. It is actually, I went back and just double check this, so it wasn't my imagination, the first budget since October 2021. Of course, 2022 was the year of 4 chancellors and 3 prime ministers. In that period of time, although we had a failed mini budget and then a reversal of a mini budget, there's no actual budget held in 2022 at all. So maybe just go back. I did a little bit of research last night about the history of chancellors. I just wondered if there was another year like that where there were so many chancellors. You can actually trace the history of the office of the Chancellor of the Exchequer back to 1221, unbelievably. And in all that period of time, 900 odd years, there has in fact been one other year where there were 4 chancellors. And that was the year 1827. A couple of you remember that, Graham. And in that year, the reason there were 4 chancellors is at the time, George Canning, who was the Prime Minister from April to August 1827, he also held the office of Chancellor of the Exchequer as well. So he had a dual role, but he went and died in office. And he claimed, at that point anyway, the record for the shortest ever Prime Minister. He died after 119 days in office. 1827 must have thought they had everything nailed in terms of records. But then, of course, Liz Truss came along and ruined the record breaking. So, yeah, 2022 was the next year that we had 4 chancellors, but actually no budgets. So for the 23 budget, this is actually Mr. Hunt's first budget. It seems like he's been around for a long time, but he's only actually been Chancellor for 5 months now. I was speaking to Charlotte just before it came out. Charlotte thought he was hilarious, that he had joke after joke, which is unusual perhaps for a Chancellor. But the habit these days of a lot of the information leaking out in the days before the budget certainly was repeated this time around as well, with a lot of rumours of what was actually going to be said in the budget, but he did still manage to keep a couple of surprises back. So what I'm going to do is give you a summary of what he said in the speech, and then there's a couple of things that actually weren't in the speech at all, but some press releases have come out since. And then at the end, we'll try and answer any questions that you've got. But he start off, it was a very bold statement that despite all the doom mongers, that in fact no technical recession was in fact going to occur. Now, the reason he used the word technical recession is because growth is actually forecast to be a minus figure for 2023, which most people might think, well, that's a recession. But technical recession, the definition is that you have two consecutive quarters of negative growth, and that's how he gets around the fact that there is in fact no actual recession, despite the fact there is negative growth for the year. The forecasts for the years ahead have dramatically changed since the last budget. They're now forecasting 1.8% growth for 2024, 2.5% for 25, and then back down to 2.1% for 2026, which is significantly above the forecast when we were looking at the position only a few months ago, really. Probably the biggest change in terms of the forecast, you'll have heard Rishi Sunak bang on about all these things he's going to stop doing, and one of his things was to halve inflation by the end of the year, and the forecast now is substantially beyond that. They're now forecasting inflation will fall to 2.9% by the end of 2023. So it's not more than half, it's less than a third, almost a quarter of the current rates. So a significant change to the figures there, and that is largely, I think, led by the huge reduction in energy prices that have happened over the last few months. There's one that the sort of first little joke I think that came in, although it probably wasn't meant to be. I don't know if you've seen in the news recently that Rishi Sunak has built an indoor swimming pool at his private residence in his constituency, and it was causing so much heat that the local power station couldn't cope with it, and they had to build a new power station for the local area because his swimming pool was taking all of the heat in. And without even dropping so much as a smirk, he's announced a £63 million fund for local authorities to help improve the electricity supply for public pools, believe it or not. That's why all the laughter was coming from the Labour benches in that respect. Fuel duties frozen again for another year. I think that was widely expected, but obviously is very welcome. And he made a big deal about alcohol duties effectively being frozen up until August this year, and then they'll be increased by inflation. But a difference now between the rates that would apply to beer and other alcoholic drinks sold in pubs compared to supermarkets, which he stated was only possible because of Brexit. So now we have the answer to the question as to what is the point of Brexit. If you can name one good thing that's come from Brexit, is that beer will now be cheaper in the pub. That wouldn't have been the case if we stayed in the EU, apparently. 11 billion extra for defence over the next 5 years. Again, that was widely expected. Then he got on to like the business side, and I think, but I don't know, that this was meant to be a reference to the recent Oscar-winning film, but he came up with these 4 E's, which he described as enterprise, employment, education, and everywhere. I think it was meant to be funny. No one got it at all, obviously, and he started immediately with the everywhere, which was, I think, reference to the fact that they're building these new investment zones, which are going to be everywhere in the UK, 8 in England, and a minimum of 1 each in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. I don't think they're quite as big as everyone has made these out to be. They're talking about funding from the government of £80 million for each zone, which doesn't sound like a huge amount of money, but I expect some of the detail will come later. There will be various reliefs available to businesses that invest in these new zones, and what they're aimed at is sort of areas that need substantial regeneration. And he gave the sort of previous example of the Liverpool docks and Canary Wharf as signs of how, you know, success can be spread across the country. So we'll see about that. He then moved on to business tax, and he confirmed, unfortunately, that the corporation tax rise, which was scheduled to go up to 25% from the 1st of April, is indeed going to go up to 25% from 1st of April. And just as a reminder, it's not quite as straightforward as saying that the rate of corporation tax is now 25%, because we've actually got 3 different rates. The first 50,000 of profit is still taxed at 19%. Profits over £250,000, once you get to £250,000 and above, are taxed at what's now known as the full rate, 25%. And then you have that little catch-up bit in between the 50,000 and the 250,000 profit, which bizarrely comes out at a higher rate of tax. 26.5% is actually the true top rate of corporation tax now. And again, it's not even as simple as saying, well, those are the rates, because these apply now to be split between associated companies. So if you run two limited companies that are both trading in some form or other, then all of those limits are split between the number of companies under your control. So you can very quickly get into the full rate of 25% if you've got 3 or 4 companies, for instance, that are relevant. There is some tinkering around R&D credits. He made a big song and dance about it in his speech. The reality is it's not going to apply to very many companies at all. There is an increase in the rate effectively for those companies that have more than 40% of all expenditure on R&D. So it's very much aimed at the sort of technical, new IT or drug-related type companies, not supplied, by the way, the ones that make ones, over the next year. So I don't think that's going to apply to too many of our clients, but there is some tinkering around the edges there, as there was also on the expenditure for film credits and immediate sectors, etc. The biggest thing, and this was absolutely not expected, or certainly a well-kept secret, was when it came to the subject of capital allowances. Now, you may recall over the last few years, we've had this increased rate of £1 million of allowances, the annual investment allowance, whereby more or less the first £1 million of expenditure on capital items could be deducted straight from your profits. We had the super deduction that came in for a period of time, which was meant to sort of compensate in some way for the corporation tax rate going up. But he's pulled the old rabbit out of the hat, as they say, and effectively said full capital expensing is going to be the way forward. In other words, an annual investment allowance without limit. He's guaranteed that for the next 3 years, but he has said that they want to make that permanent. Now, this is the biggest change in capital allowances that I can certainly recall, but that would mean that, the larger companies, if they want to spend £10 million a year on capital equipment, they will be able to deduct the full £10 million, as long as it qualifies under the normal capital allowance rules, straight off the bottom line for profit. I think a very, very substantial change, worth apparently £9 billion a year, which by knowing maths means that there's about £36 billion of investment therefore expected by the UK corporate market as a result of the change. So pretty significant. On employment, there was a lot of talk about what they call the economically inactive. Really do think they need to come up with a better phrase for this group of people, but apparently there are 7 million adults not working in the UK at the moment, and that's for various reasons. Some will be carers, some will have retired early, etc. And they are trying to break down the barriers to working, and they come at that in a number of different ways. The idea, of course, is to get more people into the employment market because employees are scarce at the moment. There are 1 million vacancies currently in the employment market, and you would think on the face of it, if there are 7 million people not working, they shouldn't be too difficult to fill. But anyone who employs anyone at the moment will know that that is not the case. And they've put a lot of effort into coming up with new ways to deal with that. The areas that they touched on, those with disabilities at the moment, there's a huge barrier to certain types of benefit claims and working, and they are effectively doing away with what is a double test. The concern for those with disability benefits has always been that you are entitled to the benefit if you are not fit for work, but if you want to work, they say, well, then you're not entitled to your disability benefit, and it's a bit of a vicious circle. So they're doing away with that test so that those who get into employment do not automatically lose any disability benefits. And there's probably 2 million people within that 7 million that applies to. So it could be quite a fundamental change. The other thing is childcare, which again they've made a significant announcement. There's certainly rumours that this was going to happen, but we've got the actual facts of what they're trying to do now. In essence, what they're trying to do is get to the point by April 25 that everyone who has a child at least 9 months old, so in other words, at the end of the normal sort of maternity period, is eligible for some free childcare up to 30 hours a week. That's 30 hours a week based on a 38-week year, i.e. the normal school year. Although that is phased in over a couple of years. So it starts at the moment from April 24, working parents with 2-year-olds can get 15 hours per week free. That will go to children from 9 months from September 24, and then from September 25, all working parents of children aged 9 months up to 3 years can access 30 hours free childcare per year. It's a pretty substantial change. The issue I think there is whether there's actually any spaces for in the nurseries for all of this increase. I think that's part of the reason they say for the staging in is they want the sector to gear up for this. But certainly that is going to need some pretty substantial number of new nursery places, I think, to be available for this to become workable. But it is a big change. On top of that, they are looking at what they call wraparound care. I don't know why they come up with these stupid phrases. It's basically before school and after school clubs at all schools from 2026, I think they said, so that you're able effectively to have children there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Again, trying to break down the barriers for people coming back to work. So that is all quite significant. But then the biggest bit by a long way, and one of the reasons why a lot of people are leaving the NHS in particular, retiring, is the pension rules, which have had so many changes over the last 2 decades really, since 2006, and now we've got probably the biggest change of all. There was a lifetime allowance. That's the amount you could have in your pension fund effectively on a tax-free basis, which stood at a rather nice, neat round number of £1,073,100. That has previously been as high as 1.8 million. There's been so many changes that there are protections for various people that had above that amount before the rules changed. That was cut to 1.5 million and then eventually down to 1 million and then back up to the current level over the last few years. And that was making it not worthwhile for senior doctors, etc., to continue to work past early retirement age, because they were being taxed at effectively a 55% tax rate on any excess over that limit. The rumour was that they were going to put it back to the 1.8 million, which on its own would have been a massive change. And in true dramatic style of all chancellors, he said, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that." And then he says, "I'm going to abolish the limit." So now no lifetime allowance limit whatsoever, which means you can build up a pension fund as high as you like, as long as you stay within the contribution limits. And those themselves have also had a hike. The maximum amount that you could put in per year is £40,000 up until 6th of April. Then it rises to £60,000, so a 50% increase. And even there's some tinkering around some of the other lower allowances. If you'd already taken part of your pension pot post age 55, there was a reduced allowance at which you could contribute, which went from 10,000 down to 4,000. It's now back up to 10,000 from 6th of April. So really have come at it from all sides. And you think that's brilliant. And I was actually sitting next to one of our wealth managers from St James as we were watching it, and he literally punched the air when he heard this bit come out. It really does eliminate, I think, anyone's difficulty as to whether pensions are a good or bad thing. one of the other benefits, aside from the income tax side of it, is the fact that your assets within a pension scheme are inheritance tax free. Now, while it was £1 million, that's something that was always good, but an unlimited pension fund now becomes not just an income tax tool, but very much an income tax IHT planning tool as well, I think. And most likely, I think once we've sort of seen all the detail of the new rules, we will hold a separate webinar on the subject of these new pension rules, because they are very, very significant indeed. One thing that didn't change with that, I've seen in the initial press release, certainly wasn't mentioned in the speech itself. You'll be aware, I'm sure, that you can withdraw 25% of your pension fund on a tax-free basis when you get to retirement age. 25% of 1,073,100 is about 268,000 something. And you would think, okay, so there's no lifetime allowance anymore, so no limit on the 25% that you can take. But that isn't the case. They've fixed the 25%, now becomes the 25% for a maximum of £268,375, I think it is, that can be taken on a tax-free basis. So even though the lifetime allowance is now unlimited, the amount that you can take on a cash-free basis, tax-free basis, as a lump sum has not changed. That is still fixed based on the old limit, unless, of course, you had the previous protections from earlier schemes. So still very significant benefit there, and you know, it's something that everyone's gonna need to review over the next couple of years, I would think. Other points from the speech, well, not from the speech, outside of the speech, and these could potentially be significant changes. One is you may have seen and heard lots of adverts on the radio about so-called repayment agents that have moved into the tax market over previous years. Essentially, what they do is they get people to sign up online, and they make claims for people against their employment income, such as working from home allowances, uniform allowances, all that sort of stuff. And they maximise all of those claims on a fairly standardised basis without really knowing the ins and outs of the taxpayers that they're dealing with. And they all operated on the basis that the repayments were mandated to those repayment agent companies. And then once the repayment had been received, they would send you a cheque for 70% of what they got. The problem with that is that if the claims were ever queried, which they are quite often because they're often inflated and wrong, there was no way for the taxpayer to get their money back from the repayment agent. So they have abolished the mandating of income tax repayments entirely. In other words, even if you sign a form that says, I mandate my income tax repayment to whatever the entity is, that will no longer be valid. So that's going to make their business model very difficult indeed, which I think is the point. For divorcing couples or those in separation, there has long been this difficulty with assets transferred between separating parties, that if it happened after the end of the tax year of separation, that capital gains could occur. There was a consultation paper some time ago now, and the result of that is they're bringing legislation in from 6th of April, which effectively extends that period now to a 3-year period of time. And actually, it's a longer period of time if it becomes part of a formal divorce agreement. So as long as it is a divorce agreement that's stamped by a court, then you can go beyond that 3-year period of time. The intention is, quite simply, to remove capital gains tax from what is normally a difficult situation for people anyway. And there was a further twist, which I haven't quite read all of the detail yet, exactly how it works. But sometimes in divorce settlements, there can be a percentage of the marital home which is effectively reserved for the spouse that no longer lives in it. And that might be that, you know, when the house is sold and the kids are 18 or whatever, that you have X% that comes back to you. Prior to this rule change, that would have been an asset that was chargeable to capital gains tax because it's not your residence anymore. There appears to be a new exemption coming in to put you back in the position that you would have been at the point of divorce. So as long as it was exempt at the point of separation or divorce, then I think that the principal residence exemption is going to continue to apply regardless of how long after that is sold. Part of me thinks there's a tax planning opportunity there for divorcing couples, but we'll come on to that another time. I think once we've read the full press releases. There was also a change on company share ownership plans. There's a fairly niche share option plan which private companies can put in place. The reason they weren't so popular, weren't used a great deal, was that the maximum option that could be given to people was at a value of 30,000, and that limit has been doubled to 60,000. It might now be worth looking at those to see how they might work. And there was a change to capital gains tax, which I am fairly certain is a dig at one particular Conservative MP. Let me tell you the change and let's see if you can work out who it was. So on share for share exchange for capital gains tax purposes, generally speaking, if you have a company that takes over another company and issues shares in exchange for your existing shares, that is a no gain, no loss situation. And that's been the case for many, many years, no issue there. But it was also applied in situations where you were non-domiciled if you had a share for share exchange into a company that was not UK resident. As long as you were non-domiciled, that was all fine. However, there is a rule change now to say that for non-domiciled individuals subject to a share for share exchange, where the new company is non-UK resident, it will be treated as UK resident. Now, there's only one case I'm aware of that this was ever relevant, and that was in fact a former Chancellor of the Exchequer who did exactly this with his YouGov shares. He had a share for share exchange into a foreign company that was owned by a foreign trust set up by his parents, and that was what actually led to his downfall effectively. And he ended up paying back, I think it was £5 million plus a 30% penalty, which he managed to do during that brief period of time he was actually Chancellor of the Exchequer himself. So it's quite clearly a dig there from, I think, Mr. Hunt or Mr. Sunak, or the two of them together to close that loophole and make quite a big public thing about it. That is all the major rule changes that we have seen so far. The two most significant points by far is the capital allowance thing, or as they now call it, what was the exact title, was something like present expensing or something like that. But it is effectively unlimited capital allowances for corporate entities from April 23, so not restricted to the £1 million AIA anymore. That's very significant for the larger companies. And obviously the pension change is absolutely huge, going from £1 million restricted lifetime allowance to one without limit, and a 50% increase in what you can put in and get tax relief from pensions, from 40,000 to 60,000 a year, are very significant changes. And I was looking at some figures last night. This was before they actually did away with the limit, just as an example to you. And I think the thing about pensions that often people forget is that they are outside of people's estates and therefore an inheritance tax vehicle. Let's say hypothetically that you had saved £1 million over your lifetime, which is going to pass to your descendants. Ordinarily, you'd pay, or they would pay £400,000 for inheritance tax, and they'd receive 600,000. Yeah, but that same £1 million had been invested into a pension scheme over a period of time with appropriate tax release, you could get effectively 1.8 million into a pension scheme, and that 1.8 million is inheritance tax free. That same £1 million can effectively be a threefold increase to your descendants, effectively to your beneficiaries. That was when we had the limit. Now that it's without limit, the figures are just astronomical as to what can be achieved there. But there we go. So that's the main points from the budget speech today. If we've got any questions or anything that you need clarity on, you can either stick them into the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and fire away, or any other tax questions.
We've had a question in from Paul Freeman.
Yeah.
And it says, does there appear to be any change in the qualifying criteria for capital allowances relief? And when is the new unlimited allowance effective?
So the new unlimited amount comes into effect from 1st of April. I was desperately checking before I came on to see what would happen in accounting periods that cross the date. As far as I can make out, and we have to wait for the final detail, any expenditure after 1st of April, regardless if it's in an accounting period in which you've already got an AIA claim, is effective. So we're pretty clear that the cut-off date is 1st of April 2023. That's when the new rules will come in. There doesn't appear to be, that I've seen, any change to the qualifying criteria. So as long as you have expenditure that would normally qualify for the AIA, then it will qualify for the new relief. Things that are definitely not okay, because I checked immediately, were things like cars. They all still have their special rules. So this is intended to apply only to the sort of plant and machinery type element, not those allowances where there are special rules such as cars, etc.
Does anyone else have any further questions they'd like to put forward?
John, just a quick one.
Yeah.
With the pension side of things,
Mhm.
has the income thresholds changed? Would you know?
Do you mean in which sense?
You know, when you've got certain, you can only put a certain amount in after, I don't know, 10,000 after, was it 200 and
Yeah,
something?
so the basic limit, which was 40,000 per annum, has increased to 60,000 per annum. That's the maximum contribution amount now. Unless your scheme you've already taken something from, it's called the money purchase allowance. If you'd already started drawing to some extent or taken part of your cash-free lump sum, then you were restricted down to 4,000, and that limit is going back up to 10,000. So the minimum anyone can do is the 10,000. But for the majority of people, pre-taking any benefits, the amount you can put in now is 60,000.
Thank you. So when we go to the pub for draft beer.
Absolutely. We always knew Brexit would come through in the end.
Any last questions before we draw to a close? So I think, as obviously mentioned before, we have recorded this, so I will drop you a link after with the video so that you can rewatch or pick up any elements that you think you might have missed. And again, if you do have any further questions, please feel free just to drop us an email, and then I'll happily pass them on to John or a member of the team so we can pick up from there. So thank you very much to everyone for coming, and we hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye.